Missions conference. I tell you, one of the things I always enjoy most, I've been in quite a few mission conferences lately. I was just in a 5-day conference out in the middle of the Atlantic, a little Canadian island that has a little tiny church with a little tiny population. And I tell you what, they had, just like here, reps from all different missions, and I always stand there amazed. It's almost like the coat of many colors. God is reaching this world in beautiful ways, all of them very different strategies, different places, different focuses, but it's all for one goal, to bring people to Jesus Christ. And that's the awesome thing of a missions conference. We get to hear all these little stories, and just now we heard about 4. And today I'm going to talk about another one, a little different from the deep jungles of Indonesia, but I want to start off with reading your theme to you. If you'll turn to Romans chapter 15, verse 20. Romans 15, verse 20 and 21. This is Paul speaking. Paul has been serving as a Jewish leader. He's been persecuting Christians. The Lord, we know the story, knocks him off his horse. He gets to see Christ. His eyes are blinded. And through many events, he's brought to a clear walk with the Lord. And then he actually goes to Bible school where his teacher was Jesus Christ. And he has 3 years with the Lord to be trained and prepared, and he enters ministry. And Paul is one that you see all through his life, a passion to see those that don't know Jesus to know Jesus. Kathy and I serve with Ethnos. Some of you used to know us as New Tribes Mission, same organization. And as in my personal experience, but many of our missionaries found as their tribal people were getting smartphones, they're looking up their missionary, and they're seeing their missionaries from New Tribes Mission. And our tribal people don't like that name. And they would tell us, why New Tribes Mission? We're not new at all. You're the new people. You should call yourselves the New Missionary Mission. So we changed our name to Ethnos because that's what God calls them. And ethnos is a word that you see come up all through the New Testament. It was Paul's passion that the ethnos would know Jesus Christ. Ethnos simply means people groups. And here, if you'll turn to Romans chapter 15, I'm going to read your theme verse. This is an incredible theme. It's a theme that excites me. I would have walked here. Would have needed a lot more time, but to join a conference with this theme. Thus I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation. He's quoting now from Isaiah chapter 52. But as it is written, those who have never been told of him will see, and those who have never heard will understand. Paul was a man who, as he traveled, saw people that didn't even know who Jesus Christ was. And when I read this, I can't help but think back when I was a young boy. My parents served in Indonesia. I was 5 years old when they actually went overseas. But by the time I was 7, they were serving in the deep jungles of Indonesia in the Lauje tribe of people that had never seen outsiders. Well, they had some Japanese come in during World War II and shoot a bunch of them, and that's not a good contact. One other man had wandered into their tribe before my parents came, and they killed him. And then my parents showed up. And the Lauje were very quiet people, so my parents were polite and nice, and they didn't kill them. They didn't kill us kids. But I remember one day early on after my parents arrived there, we were playing with tribal kids, and I had one of my best friends became this little girl whose name was Anak Polomio, which means the child of Polomio. So the child of Polomio and I was about 8 or 7. She was about the same age. There was a bunch of us kids that would play. But I remember this little girl so well. We'd play at the river every day, go swimming, hiking, climbing. One day, Polomio brought his little girl onto our porch. She actually came running on in a great panic, and he laid her down, and it was very clear this little girl, who was my friend, is dying. She was dying of cerebral malaria, a malaria that gets into the brain. She was gone crazy. It's an ugly death to watch. And as I was watching her die, I'll never forget, it struck me. And I can't connect the dots for you. I don't know why. This was many years ago. But I remember watching her die, and she died that day. And I'm watching this little girl, and it struck me, this little girl has never, ever heard the name of Jesus. She had no idea who Jesus was, and I don't know, God figures out the age of accountability. I'm not going to get into that. But from a little boy looking at her thinking, this little girl has never heard of Jesus, and I remembered that verse as I'm watching this, and my dad must have shared the verse a day or two earlier, because my memory's not that great. But I connected the dots. I remember thinking of what Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. And it struck me as a little boy thinking, here's my friend dying, and she doesn't know Jesus, so she has no way to heaven. And I watched that, and I watched her die. And from that moment on, I was an 8-year-old. My whole life has been passionate about somehow being a part of bringing the gospel to those that have never heard. And I love your theme for this very reason. There is still a world that has never heard of Jesus Christ. I hope we can talk about it later, but throughout this conference, I hope you were just blown away with this idea that 29% of this world, and you're going to see a little video at the end on Sunday, 29% of this world has never heard the name of Jesus. In fact, about a quarter of this world will never ever see a Christian with their own eyes. That is why missions is still a real thing. I have people often saying, don't you think we're kind of done this thing of sending people away? They're coming to us, and that's true. Those that are coming, let's reach. But I'll tell you right now, a quarter of the world out there will never ever lie their eyes on another believer unless we go and enter their world and share with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. Missions is still a very real thing. My wife and I went to Indonesia, and today I'm going to spend a little more time focusing on the story of the Moi. It's a God story. It's a celebration of what He has done. And tomorrow we're going to look more into the Word, and then for sure on Sunday further. But I just want to share a short story. I want you to celebrate when Paul said, I want to tell those who have never heard, what does that look like? Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to live in a life, in a world, in a country? What if in Saskatchewan, nobody's heard of Jesus? No believer had ever been in Saskatchewan. Do you know what life is like when the presence of God people is not there? It's dark. It's horrible. They're not happy. And I'm going to describe some of that throughout this weekend. But life for people that have never had the presence of a believer, the Holy Spirit has never been there through His people, Satan has full reign. And it's really cruel, and it's really ugly. My wife and I arrived in Indonesia back in 1997. Seems like a long time ago now. We arrived there in January 1997 and saying, Lord, where are you going to put us? We were learning the Indonesian language, and all of a sudden, one evening, an MAF pilot came and knocked on our door, and he says, I think I found the people you guys should reach. He had been flying, and the weather pushed him low, and he said, I think I saw a whole bunch of houses in the part of the jungle. There's no records of anybody living. No government record. No one's ever been there. Long story. We did our research. Nobody knows of this tribe. A whole people group. A whole entire new language. The government didn't even know they existed. So in June 2000, we got on a helicopter with Heli Mission, and we flew out there. And I'm going to tell you right now, as we were flying, we did a lot of praying. We had everybody we knew praying, because if you've read many of the missionary stories of Irian Jaya, that's where we were, Don Richardson's book, does that ring a bell for anybody? And many other stories. They were cannibals. I don't know if you ever imagined what it's like to jump out of a helicopter into a cannibal village. That didn't excite me a whole bunch, but it sure brought me to a lot of prayer. And I said goodbye to my wife the night before and to my 3 little kids, and I remember kind of getting kind of sappy and crying a bit. My wife's like, go, God's going to take care of you. Just go, let's reach these people. Like, she's got a very focused heart. That's my wife, Kathy. As we were flying out there, we were praying. And as we were looking for a place, and we saw all these tribal huts, and these people have seen helicopters and airplanes since World War II. Lots of them. They've never seen one come down. They just assumed those are evil spirits coming and going. And suddenly one's coming out of the air for the first time. We were trying to find a place to land, and we could see houses on the hill, and all the women and children in those houses were jumping out, and they're running into the jungle, and that didn't scare me. What scared me was all the men. There was about a dozen of them. They all had a big handful of arrows and a bow in their hand. We could see it clearly. And they're running all around the garden as we're trying to find a place, because these are Stone Age people. They didn't cut the trees down, they delimbed them. And so they're all sticking up in the air. We're trying to find a place big enough to get the helicopter squeezed in. As we're coming in lower and lower, we could see all these people with their bows and arrows. And we were getting lower. We all had our doors open because the pilot said, I want that much distance before I hit a tree. That's tight for a helicopter. He was a good pilot. He brought that in lower and lower. And finally, his front skid was on a stump, and there was another branch here about to hit the bottom of the rotor, and he couldn't go any lower. And he says, you guys have to jump. Now, I had my plans. My plans in reaching cannibals isn't a big, complicated thing. You land the helicopter, you open the door, you step out, smile nice. If they shoot at you, you close the door and you go home. But when he tells you to jump, then suddenly my little door that I was counting on isn't there. And literally, the skid was up about here and the helicopter's up there. And the pilot said, you're going to have to jump. And I turned to my brother-in-law to say, what do you think? That rascal had already jumped. But the people were on my side, and all of a sudden, sure enough, there's this fuzzy head popping up on my side. I'm going to see him in a week or two. It's my brother-in-law. My sisters love the guy. We're best friends since high school. I saw his, so I thought, well, here we go. So I threw him the chainsaw. Now, we didn't have guns. The last thing we wanted to do is shoot him and send him to hell if they tried killing us. But we thought if they start attacking, maybe if we fire up the chainsaw, maybe we could chase him off. That was our protection, and God, of course. So threw him the chainsaw. Plus the chainsaw was to clear the trees so the helicopter could come in faster and easier next time. And I jumped down beside him, and I had my earphones on. I'm going to tell you right now, the people were lined up along the bush, maybe here to the back of the church away. There's about a dozen of them, maybe 10 of them, all lined up there. And they all had their bows and arrows, and they were standing straight as a warrior. They were warriors, they were men, they were killers. We didn't know if they were cannibals or not, but they were just standing, staring at us. And the pilot said, how long is it going to be? And I said, I have no idea, but don't you go until we tell you it's safe. So he's hovering with one skid on a stump. And we're watching them. And I'm telling you, the hair on your head does move, by the way. Some of mine never came back, obviously. But it started moving around, and my knees were shaking. And Steve is beside me. I think, well, how are we going to know it's safe? I still had my earphones on, so I could still talk to the pilot. I said, don't go yet, don't go yet. And all of a sudden, whatever it was, 8 to 12 men, it's hard to remember. I have pictures of us, but we saw about 8 or 10 men that day. All of them laid their bows and arrows down on the ground at the same time. And for the Moy, that is highly unnormal, highly unusual, highly something they would never do in their culture. In the face of strangers, lay their bows and arrows down. These are killers. But God did something that day because God wanted them to get the story of the good news of the Bible. So they laid their bows and arrows down. When they did that, I said to the pilot, I think it's safe, you can go. So I took my earphones off and I threw them in and jumped up and closed the door. And side note, depending on your eschatology, I remember him going up feeling like, oh, I missed the rapture. It's kind of your last chance for survival. And there he goes. Now, he was going to circle for a while, and we had radios. If there's a problem, he was going to come back. But as the warrior started walking towards us, I just remember thinking, Lord, what are we going to do? But I forgot this simple fact. This was God's program, not ours. Brothers and sisters, missions isn't our idea that we get to pick and choose. Do we want to do it or not? Is it important or not? I tell everybody there's 2 jobs in this church. In any church, there's sacrificial senders and there's sacrificial goers, and that's it. You get to pick one of those 2 jobs. We're all called to one of those 2 jobs. Many people say, Tim, I'm not called. Yeah, you are. You're either a sender or a goer. Lord, and it's between you and the Lord which it is. The vast majority are senders. Those warriors started walking towards us, and I'm thinking, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to know? And all of a sudden, here's a little cultural lesson for you guys. How do we shake if we greet somebody? We shake hands, right? How do we wave? All that is a virtual handshake. That's why we wave this way. Cultures that don't handshake, they don't do this. You know what the Moy culture did? As they were walking towards us, they started waving at us like this. That's their wave. Do you know why? Because this is their handshake. They snap knuckles. And so we'd seen other tribes do that, so we knew how to snap knuckles. And so when they came closer, we put our fingers out, they put their fingers out, and we snapped knuckles. But do you know what the greeting in their language was? You'll never guess. I believe, because the Moy is a language like no other language. The Moy is their own language. Maybe God formed it at Babel. I don't know how far back it goes. Probably Babel. I think that in Babel, when God divided up the language, he put a word in their language that would be for our petrified hearts. We were so scared. What's the first word? How do we connect? How do we show we like them? We're not here to eat them or kill them or steal from them. Because we knew they wouldn't know a single word of the outside world. Not one word. So as they came closer, they put their fingers out. We put ours out, and we greeted. And guess what their greeting was? Maybe prepared since Babel. They went, Abba. I'm sitting here so scared. These people are going to eat me. Lord, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden, Abba, really? I remember looking up and like, seriously, God? It's like God was saying, Tim, I'm here. Abba is the Greek word in the New Testament. Jesus calls his father daddy. It's Greek for daddy. Now, for them, it means something totally different. In fact, I can't tell you in a church setting. It's not appropriate. But in my mind, all I heard was Abba. Now, literally, what they're saying is, you can trust me. I'm not going to do sorcery on you in a very crude way. They're saying, you can trust me. But they don't even think of it. It's like we say, how are you? We don't think about it. Abba. So we said Abba, and pretty soon it's Abba, 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 Abba. Once we had the greetings and we're friends and they weren't eating us and we were pretty happy about that, I remember looking at these people. I don't know a word of their language. They don't have clothing on. They are, for the most part, naked. The men have a gourd, and the women had little bark skirts. That was it. I remember looking at them, Lord, how are we going to bring them from this to a mature church someday? That's a huge challenge. And there's no way we could have done it except for God. And I want to just briefly tell you the short story of how God reached those people. We started learning one word at a time, one phrase. Also, we see a man yelling at a child with a command, and we quickly write that down. How did he make a command versus a question? And we spent the next 4 years analyzing, figuring out this language. But that was the best spent years, because during those 4 years, people say, well, that took you a long time. Did you preach? No. We couldn't teach them anything. We had to learn their language. But during those 4 years we were learning their language, they were observing our lives. And they told us later, we didn't kill you because we thought you might be evil spirits. They know you can't kill an evil spirit, so they were afraid to try killing us. Once they learned we weren't spirits and became pretty convinced we were human, they started stealing and everything else from us. But at first they treated us royally because they thought we might be evil spirits. They just weren't sure. Anyways, we learned that language, learned their culture, developed friends, but all during that time, they're seeing something in our lives that are different. No way could we teach for a long time because they weren't ready to hear. But after observing our lives for 4 years, they began to say, there's something different about your God. He's stronger than all of our gods. You guys don't have the same fears we have. You guys can come home after being separated from your wife, and you're not afraid your wife's going to do sorcery on you. They saw us washing. They would never their entire life ever wash, because water is where the evil spirits live. When they got sick, they wouldn't drink water, and we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. Because if you get sick, you can't drink water, because then you'd be putting spirits in your sick body. If you're healthy, fine, drink all you want. If you're pregnant for 9 months, you can't drink water, because then you're putting a spirit in where the baby is. So a mother can only suck sugar cane and bananas, and so many miscarriages. So many stillborns, because they wouldn't drink water, because the Satan had him in the control of his cruel ways. But they could see that we could drink. We would get sick. We drink, and we got better. They would die. The day came, we passed our last language check, but we still needed another year. Around that time, my wife got very sick, and we had to leave, but the team carried on. The team, we'd already started that, putting their language into writing, and then we had to teach them to read and write their own language, so that when we started teaching from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, we could let them read it in their language. If we read it to them, then it's the white man. It's God's talk through the white man. Let them read it the first time. And so all the verses, as we translated the verses, so it took us another year to translate some, prepare the lessons, and teach them to read and write their own language. And the day came we could start teaching. We started teaching about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and murder, and they were used to murder. They murdered a lot. We had a man right there that had killed his brother to take his brother's wife. I'm sitting learning the Moy language with Apabo, my language helper, and he's telling me how he killed one day. Oh yeah, murder. And he told me how he killed 3 of his wives. That's normal well, maybe that's a little extreme, but many had killed 1 or 2 wives. Kill a lot. They weren't cannibals. They didn't eat us, by the way. We began to learn their language and culture. And we began to see these are people living in deep, deep, deep darkness. And as we began teaching through Cain and Abel and the stories all through the Old Testament, it took us months of teaching just through the Old Testament because the New Testament doesn't teach you who God is. The attributes of God are described in the Old Testament. You can't jump into the New Testament with somebody who's never heard of Jesus. The law was there like a mirror to show us our need for Christ. It wasn't very long, the Moy began saying, oh, we're just like Cain and Abel. We're just like Abraham. We've lied. We've deceived. Oh no, the law. God's wrath is on all of our lives. Our lives are full of sin. God's wrath is on us. What are we going to do? And as they heard about the sacrifice and the sheep, and they started saying, we only have pigs, and God doesn't seem to like pigs. Wow, why did he pick the one animal we have that he won't take anymore? So they started asking us, call the pilot. Tell him to bring us some sheep because we are full of God's wrath. God's wrath is on us. Bring us some sheep. We kept saying, just wait. And we kept teaching through the Old Testament. And then they get to the story of in the New Testament. And we've all so familiar with the Christmas story. But when you have gone through the Old Testament, hearing promise after promise after promise of a Redeemer, the Messiah coming, suddenly Mary and Joseph, and this is a different kind of story, and a baby who's born and there's no room and the baby's born in a manger. The Moy started saying, is that the Redeemer? Could he be the promised one all through is that him? We just said, just keep listening. We can't jump ahead of the story. Who does that? We don't ever do that in books, but we kind of do in our teaching. We skip all over the place. No, it's one big story. It's beautiful. So Jesus is born, and the angels came and said, great joy for all people. You know what the Moy did? Us too? It seemed like it was always for the Jews, but could this be for us? If you just skip right over real quickly to Luke chapter 2, verse 30. This is Simeon. Jesus is being brought to the temple, this new baby, and there Moy were watching so carefully, and Simeon's brought to the temple, and he's given to this old man named Simeon, and Simeon's been waiting to lay his eyes on the Messiah. And Simeon holds up Jesus, and he says, I have seen your salvation, which you prepared for all people. And the Moy got so excited with all people, us too, which you have prepared for all people. He is a light to reveal God to the nations. That's ethnos. A light for the ethnos, for the people groups, for the tribes. And he is the glory of your people, Israel. The Moy got so excited. Maybe this is him. And I'm skipping real quickly here. My time's running out. But as they went through the whole life of Christ, everything that happened, they were just amazed at his love, his care, his power, his grace. They said, that's just all those things we saw in the Old Testament of the qualities of God. This seems like this must be God. Could this be the Redeemer? We said, well, you got to keep listening. The day came, he was brought to the hill of Golgotha, and the disciples ran, and he was crucified. Hung on the cross, and his blood was shed. And at first, the Moy were so excited. Said, he's shedding his blood. That's great. He has to shed his blood for us, but he won't die because he's God. We didn't shoot you guys because we thought you were spirit, because you cannot kill a spirit. They know that. Their whole life is evil spirits. They had no concept of a good spirit. None. This is the first time they've heard of a good spirit. And he's amazing. And he's shedding his blood, and they're like, he can't die, because if he dies, then he's not the Redeemer. He's not God. All of a sudden, Jesus dies. He breathes his last. He gives up the ghost. And he's buried in a tomb. The Moy were devastated. And then they were angry. You've lied to us. You implied he was the Redeemer, but he can't be. He's dead. The Moy were quite upset. Just like the disciples were. Those stories are real. So The next day, well, we told him, come back tomorrow, hear the rest of the story. I don't know if we want to hear this story. It seems like a bad story. The Redeemer just died, or the closest we've ever seen. Because they had been asking us now, forget the order of sheep. Tell the pilot to bring Jesus. We need him. Well, then he died. But they came back the next day, and then they hear about the resurrection. They hear that Jesus comes alive and that whole story. And before I go any further, I wonder if we can show a short video here called Moi Testimonies. This is right after they had heard the story, they started making sense, and they started jumping up, and this is what they understood.
Any imbattle who was a man, and nomination poor, and never mind who name was your Yam can see I cool. No one any relationship him go me, ye will help. Are you any other any good house for CPI and Kuatu?
Anyway,
somebody didn't value in Yahoo. Now I'm not doing one. Anyhow, I'm not coming. Ni nama ada pergi, nama mina hu jalan uhuak kiwa, tu semua. Nari kita mi bala, nari habis.
Nari habis ulu jiwa.
Kali habis ulu jiwa.
Bom tu asyik.
Nari kita mi bala, ni bui kah, ni bupabu, bui na elok mayu. Ya, pila ini semua kah gimtei.
Bom han.
Ni meh. Kah ai pu dem gini, kah as tei ni. Ni bui.
Udi, audi.
Nama amina me. Nunggu amina me doa amina kitu, me ese ebo mina kitu, me ni kindo uhuma.
Bom nato ya me angsimen, esi nato esi tama nato ya me. Pelpa tu me, ibu pelpa tu me, mitotai me tu me. Ini ha semgo obo me, itu semgo me ese itu nagapi ese ini ha nagapi filma ese mihia ese wahado mihia ini.
Eno pelpa aku bisa bahasa hina.
Oh.
Kau nagapi?
Itu kapi. Itu bala,我没那个把不好，你那些我买给你买是比我，你医生是不是
？Itu alam wow.
Oh.
Gua kamu ini.
Tahu gua aku ni ku am dah minasin ni ay mani singen ni.
Itu au.
Itu au.
Kita anu boleh kita kau dah tu asyik.
Oh, itu ni siapa hatu ni?
Itu debi pelpa uhau, kau ese itu kapi, ya sesim naga mafia. Ani kisime 我们那是哪都有背面，你哈，ani 我那个mafia是我还是发面，ani kisime 发面你叫。
That last fellow, that was about 2 days later. The rest, there's many. There's about 110 people that first. We taught actually a fewer number first to get the language and then the larger number. But 110, about 80 got saved that first day. That guy there, the last one, he came back 2 days later and says, now I get it. And he said, can I go tell my testimony like the rest got to? That's why he's all alone all of a sudden. When people remember in Isaiah, God promised light for those in deep darkness. And then Simeon says, a light for those in darkness. God changes people when they get to hear the message of salvation. So I'm going to do this very quickly because my time is up, but baptism. Can you imagine teaching people about baptism who have always been scared to death of water? Can you imagine? So we don't want to teach them about baptism for a while. We started going through Acts and thought we'll kind of skip baptism for now. They're not ready. It's too big a jump. When they got to the baptisms in Acts, they're like, oh, we have to do that. We're like, well, just wait. No, that's what we have to do. And they said, we actually already made a little dam above your house, and we're going to get baptized up there. And it was so cool seeing the men. First, men baptizing men. We met, I wasn't actually there, but my brother-in-law and the Rich Brown, the guy that took our place, baptized a couple. And then they said, well, now we're going to baptize our wives. So the men baptized their own wives. It wasn't really pretty. None of this stuff and nice and pretty like this. They're holding their wives by the shoulders. The wives like, oh, do this. They've never been underwater in their life, ever. Do it quick, do it. And they just don't know what to do, and they just, this is all new. But do it. But their husbands, have you put your faith in Jesus Christ yet? Do you know that he's yours? Yes. And they're like, but do it, hurry. All of a sudden the men with all the might, whoosh, and then they stand back and they all laugh. And they're so excited. And this ladies come up with grins from ear. That's complete choice of victory. putting their faith in Jesus Christ. That baptism didn't save them, but it sure allowed demonstration when they've never done that, and now they're doing it. Can you imagine communion? What are you going to do with communion in the early church? Okay, so Jesus reaches out and grabs the bread. What's that? Well, it's this thing that we make with, you don't have any of those ingredients. Moy said, no worry, we can use bananas and sweet potato. That's all we have. We can make bread, but what happens when the missionaries leave? Jesus grabbed the staple off the table, and then he grabbed the wine. What's that? Well, it's this, it's great. You don't have grapes. You don't have it. All you've ever drank is water. So you know what the Moy had to do? They had to think that through. They said, we've only drank water. I think that's what we'll use too. They ran out and cut little bamboo cups with, the dividers, and made cups from bamboo, and that's what they used for communion, water and sweet potato or banana. Isn't that amazing? But that's God's church. A new church was born that day. And then with the teaching and the baptism, all took a couple days or a week to get to that point as we kept teaching. But a church was born and God was working. I'm going to show one last video, then I'll be done for tonight. This video is about Dima Patai. So when that first group heard the story, a brother and sister were in that first teaching. One of them, the brother you actually saw there a bit ago. Then the brother and sister heard this. They said, we have a dad we haven't seen in many, 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 many moons. In fact, they use the word say, what you're going to see this man say. Say. It means a long time goes by. They hadn't seen their dad for many years. But they said, he's back in the jungle somewhere in another part of the tribe. We're going to go find him and share this story of the good news of Jesus Christ with our dad. Brother and sister hiked for days. They found their dad. They shared the whole story of the good news with him. He got saved. He's an old man. Very slowly they helped him. They hiked all through the jungle back to where our missionaries were, where we were there. And they got there on a Saturday, and nobody really knew this man, and he shows up in church on Sunday. First time. Most of Moy, he's Moy, but from a far part of the tribe. They didn't know who he was. He shows up in church, and he listens to the teaching. He's an old man. You're going to see him in a moment. And then they're talking about how, I don't know what they're talking about, but they came to communion. And so communion time, the young man doing communion, he's got bananas and sweet potato in the water in his hand. Also, he comes to this new old man, a Moy man, and they said, you can't have this because you don't know Jesus. And this man, his name is Dima Patai, says, I know Jesus. He says, tell us your story about Jesus. So in about 3 minutes, he describes the whole story of salvation. And you're going to see him describe that here in about 2.5 minutes, maybe 3. But as you're watching this, you're going to see a couple phrases, because it's all Moy. It's not English. How would you say born again? He says, you see, a new cord was cut for me. In the deep jungle, in the bondage of Satan, when a woman's had 3 children, they can't keep more than that alive, and that's even rare to have 3. They would usually, the mother would go into the bush by herself, dig a hole, birth into the hole, not cut the cord, placenta baby, and buried alive. Never go back. Many babies were buried alive under Satan's control. Many. But if you cut the cord, it means you want that baby. Any baby you give birth to, you want the baby, you cut the cord. And so he says, a new cord was cut for me. That's God himself wanted me, and God cut my cord, and now I'm his child. You're going to see phrases like that, and I want you to know now, Dima Patai is with the Lord now. He died a few years ago, shortly after the recording. But in Moy culture, when somebody is older and powerful and been around a long time, whenever he's dying, everybody from far and wide comes to mourn loudly around him before he dies, because in their mind, if this dying person sees me mourning, then they'll know how much I must like him, and they won't come haunt me. But if I don't mourn for them, then they'll haunt me. So everybody starts mourning when he was getting very sick and about to die, and he says, stop, don't mourn for me. I only have one road. I can only go to heaven. I'm not going to spend time haunting you guys. I'm going to heaven. That's the only road out for me. One way. And he says, you guys must all choose that way too. And he passed away. So you'll meet him in heaven. You will meet him in heaven. So this is his story. And you know what? In 3 minutes, you can tell the whole story of the Bible. Just watch how he does it.
Sometime over the past couple of years, one of our neighbors, an older couple, has come to know Jesus as their Savior. This has been primarily through the vibrant testimony of their married daughter and teenage son. I recently asked the husband, a frail old man, to share his testimony. Years ago, he was blinded in one eye by a falling branch. Now, from a hard life and old age, his other eye is also failing. Despite being nearly blind, you'll be amazed to hear how well this man can truly see. Here are Dimapatai's unscripted thoughts on Jesus.
메뉴 아바 메 예수시 와 바무고 가 아바 미에누
예. 에 와하 오고 에루아 와 오늘아 마시나 오늘아 마로 이비디시후 앞에한테 배히 같이 저는 와 미나 갑나나 미나 갑이 미나 갑아 cái mỗi ngày muốn đa thế của cái mù cả mấy là hào ấy chết rồi cái đó và chỉ mà nè bớt mai ở đáp giáอยู่mai đáp giáอยู่mai rồi thằng của nó giống ai apa hu tahu thì thì cũng mà nó bỏ ra cái cây này vì na ông nhớ cả thằng mai vì ông mang vì đó mà tôi mà và chỉ là mấy bộ cái gì hết có để lúc nào mà cái ở bảo anh ấy kêu phong xe về anh ấy bị ghé bộ thôi phải đổ xe ba cũng có và anh cái để bán pe bị đi xí ba mẹ ấy cao cái ok anh ấy quấn xem là cái kính mà tôi mà tổ khi mấy chuyện làm mà chứ phải wow anh ấy gọi chuyện này mà anh ta chỉ đưa đi vào thì cả học phải bây giờ qua đi gạt em quên ấy giờ mang ra gì chưa nào thành
Our time is up. Isaiah promised light for those in darkness. Simeon said a light for those in darkness. Paul said we must go to those that have never heard. If you just, last verse in closing, Revelations chapter 5, verse 9. This is at the throne room. This is a coming day. And Jesus is there, and they sang a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and break its seals and open it. You were slaughtered, and your blood has ransomed people for God from every tribe, language, people, and there's the word ethnos. Every people group. It was prophesied, it's happening, and we get the privilege to be a part of it now. That is what Missions Conference is, both to be reminded, challenged, and encouraged. God is doing it. There's still about 2,000, depends how you look at it. Some will even say 6,000, depends how you divide up the languages. Languages or ethnos that still have not heard once. We still have a job to do. This is still really important. This is still a major part of the call of the church and every individual in it. I'm going to just let you see tomorrow, hopefully quicker than tonight. what would it like when the Word of God appears for the first time? So the Moy had to wait about 20 years as my brother-in-law and sister worked, and they worked on the translation of the New Testament and a lot of the Old. The day finally came that the Bible appeared in their lands, and you should see their reaction. We're going to see that tomorrow night. Thank you.